21 years since the magazine Private Eye first appeared in London. Nobody expected that the satirical humorous scandal sheet, edited by a group of irreverent graduates, would last. But now it has a circulation of nearly 200,000, more, that is, than the combined circulations of The Spectator, The New Statesman, The Listener and Punch. The Private Eye story by Patrick Marnham is a history of the magazine written to mark its coming of age. It's a detailed account, well illustrated, of the policies and personalities involved in the magazine, of the rows, the libels, the cartoons, the general raffishness and cheekiness of a publication that combined solid information and journalistic coverage with outrageous humour and sometimes inspired mickey-taking. Nowhere more amusingly than in Private Eye weekly letter, perhaps, allegedly written by Mrs. Thatcher's husband Dennis, to his old crony Bill, the Dear Bill letters, this year's collection called One for the Road. And also published this week the 1982 potpourri of the best of Private Eye, called this year Bog's Head Revisited. Clive James and Melvyn Bragg on the cover, just two of the many Aunt Sallies pilloried in this entertaining cross-section from The Eye, as its devotees call it. Here in Ireland, we might have a tradition of satire in our Gaelic poetry, but hardly in our modern journalism, or at least not to speak of. The old Dublin Opinion's occasional sharpness was usually mollified by a degree of affection. In more recent years, McGill, Hibernia, and In Dublin Magazine, for example, have shown a certain satirical spirit now and again, and a concern for digging under at least some local carpets. John Mulcahy was owner and editor of the late-lamented Hibernia, and Colin Tobin is features editor of In Dublin, a youngish fortnightly that casts a cold eye sometimes on more than purely local events. Colin Tobin, reading Patrick Marnham's story of Private Eye, did you find it worth reading for its own sake as a book, or simply as something that made you think what might happen in this country?
No, I found it terribly enjoyable. It's a terribly enjoyable book. It's a bit sketchy. Marnham seems to object to Richard Ingrams to a certain extent.
Richard Ingrams is
the editor, and Marnham charts the move of the magazine from the left to the right, and also charts the way in which Ingrams really has no policies much. Is just interested in fun and sport, doesn't check stories before they go in. He doesn't, I think, go on enough about precisely how funny Private Eye can be. I mean, in competitions like Win the Queen Mother, or Should A.J. Eyre be kept alive, or Is there anything wrong with grapefruits? You know, a doctor
he does seem more interested in the investigative journalism about scandals in the city.
Yes, he has worked in that area for Private Eye himself, and he is himself an investigative journalist. So it is an area in which he feels Private Eye now lacks any sort of punch.
Yeah. John Mulcahy, your magazine, Hibernia, I think was the first in Ireland many years ago to analyse company reports and to deal with business news as a proper subject for journalistic inquiry. Therefore, you must have been conscious of some aspects of private eyery a long time ago, really.
Well, I suppose there are somewhat parallels. I think this is the extraordinary combination about Private Eye, that it's this mixture of farce and fact, and the sort of fact that just doesn't appear in any of the other enormous number of publications. And it is remarkable how much genuine research and how much original scandal has been unearthed in that little fortnightly publication over those years. Most of the major financial scandal stories in England over the past 20 years have been either originated or certainly run to ground by that small team in Private Eye. And I think this is I think this is the real core of its success, because it's the sort of publication that has to be read if you're living in London, because there is information there, city information, financial information, and of course information about politicians, apart from all the comic side that Colin mentions. It makes it absolutely essential reading for, as you say, nearly 200,000 people. It's a very large circulation.
And he also talks in the book about how conservative the editors in Fleet Street were, how they wouldn't print stories, although they had the stories, they would keep it working in background, and they just wouldn't use them. Don't we have very much the same situation here with the editors of the main papers, with the fact that people know stories and don't use them?
You do indeed, but this is because mostly the larger the paper and the greater part of the establishment, they either don't, for their own reasons, want to publish things, or they fear to publish them because of the libel danger. And the budget in Private Eye now for libel is £100,000 a year. I mean, it's an enormous
I mean,
amount.
I just don't think there'd be any possibility of an Irish magazine or an Irish publication being able to afford such a libel budget.
Well, I was wondering about that because the circulation is about 190,000, and I think the circulation of a paper like the Sunday Irish Independent here is about 170,000. There's big money involved in each case, yet that the private eye seems to be prepared for libel all the time. It has a large shield held in front of it, and it says, throw stones, go on, I'll try and fend them off if they can. And they seem to fend them off extraordinarily well, considering the pretty scurrilous stuff that they do print on occasion.
Yes, well, they do fend them off. They also do pay out an awful lot. But the big difference between Private Eye, all its resources are going into that sort of thing, whereas the Irish Independent or any other big newspapers is there to make profits for its shareholders.
Of course, and the shareholders in Private Eye, in fact, I think they get cases of wine at Christmas.
Exactly,
or something.
something.
And
Yeah.
it is very much an amateur publication. They don't have a large staff.
Yeah.
The paper is terrible.
For
Layout is dreadful.
To what, John, do you attribute its 21 years as an amateurish publication, quite rich nowadays and battling away? What is it? Richard Ingram's personality, his doggedness?
Well, it's this combination, but it's also they have had these very good writers as Michael Gilliard is actually the financial expert, and of course Paul Foote was the original investigative journalist. He was the one who got into a lot of the stories and the scandals in the 60s. So I think I would attribute this extra circulation over and above the sort of the comic side to the genuine information that you can get in Private Eye and you cannot get elsewhere.
And then to pretty classy contributors as journalists, like now Oban War and some years ago, say, Claude Coben.
Yeah, but I mean, with War, for example, you have an element of viciousness that you simply don't find anywhere else. I mean, the things he's said and written about people are, absolutely vicious. For example, one of the staff of Now magazine, they put curses on people. They put a curse on the entire staff of Now magazine, and one of them had an accident and was dying. And Oberyn Wall was gloating and crowing.
That sort of stuff isn't very funny.
Which is just really, it's very difficult to take, and it's something Marnham doesn't even bother defending.
What do you think about the difference between the atmosphere in which you operate here, John, as editor, and in England, a much larger community there, and the right to privacy? Do we respect it more here? Does it mean more because we're a smaller community? Does it have to mean more? And because we're a smaller community, do we in fact run away from saying things that it should be quite possible and permissible to say? Say, Colin.
Well, I think it would be wonderful to start a Private Eye. I think we have a real establishment here. People would be really wonderful to pillory, wonderful to get. And I think that the degree of public hatred of public figures in this country has never been the same as it is now. And it would just be wonderful to start. You would need a great deal of money. If I were a millionaire, precisely what I would do would be start a magazine which would just simply abuse and write vicious articles about public people, including editors, including the media, including the judiciary, including politicians. But you need a great deal of money, you need an enormous circulation. And of course you can't depend on advertising in that situation because all those subtle pressures can be put on you, not much printings.
Looking at the three books here that you have been looking at, we don't have to talk very much about the Dear Bill letters, but they are funny.
Yeah. I disagree with John about the large circulation. I think the large circulation is very much due to the fun. I think that the business circulation will always stay at a certain level. Mm-hmm. But the fact that over the last 2 years the circulation has gone to 190,000 is due to the amount of fun and sport and viciousness in the...
How much of this book is intelligible to the average Irish reader, John?
Well, it's amazing that, I don't know what exactly the circulation in Ireland is, but that it is sold quite widely in Dublin, whereas it hardly ever has any reference to Irish affairs. It sometimes has, of course, rather notoriously. But there is a readership. I think there's a readership right throughout Britain, and they cannot understand reference to half the people that are mentioned because most of the mentions are a very small circle of people in the West End of London.
So the thing comes back to really a journalistic flair. Some happy mixture of things, and does this book reflect it properly?
Well, the book is, of course, a summary of what's gone on, but I do think it does reflect this thing in society today that it's beyond most people's comprehension and things have been done way out there somewhere, and so the only attitude to it is spoof, because it's just beyond people's control, and I think the large circulation is reflecting this. They can sort of equate with that.
It's also terribly easy to read, everything in it is terribly short. Marnham has a nice bit about kids reading because they thought it was a comic.
That's right, yes.
So, I think that it is almost a tabloid magazine.
Okay, Colin Turvine, John Mulcahy, thank you both very much.